Hi, everybody. Welcome to All Things Metaphysical podcast with Kellie and Gail. This is episode 40.
Wow. Time flies when you're having fun.
We have done 40 episodes.
Wow.
So, we were talking before the show about the energy that's going on right now. So, do you want to kind of cue everyone else in on what we were talking about before we came on?
Sure. A couple of weeks ago, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, on the show, I commented on how I'd become aware of they're calling themselves watchers, but they're not the watchers that most people know from the Bible. That's not what they are. They're a dark, they're a darkness. They're really not even individual beings. They're accumulation of darkness. And they are on the planet and they're wreaking havoc with people's energy levels, people's dreams. People are having weird dreams, anxiety attacks, panic attacks, anger for no apparent reason. Those kinds of things are happening more and more. And what I have learned through trying to have a discussion with these beings is the purpose of being here right now is because of all the upheaval that we've gone through. There is a need for people to go deeper into themselves, into their shadow selves. I've heard so many people say, it's always love and light, keep your thoughts positive. No, do not do that. Because what happens, everything has to be a balance.
Mhm.
The more positivity you talk about, you're creating an equal amount of darkness, of a shadow self. So, what we need to do is dig deep enough into that shadow to find out what is making us a little crazy right now.
Mhm.
People who haven't had panic attacks in years are having panic attacks. People who haven't had, a nightmare in decades are having nightmares. I've heard from people whose kids are generally very good playing well with others who all of a sudden are throwing temper tantrums. And a lot of that is because we've gone through so much.
Mhm.
And we've buried so much as humanity because people are trying to still be social, still be positive, still be all this, stuff, airy fairy stuff, I call it. Um, and you can't be on all one side. Think of your life and your soul as like a teeter totter.
Mhm.
I had a teacher early on who explained it that way. When you are creating and you're going like gangbusters and everything's going well, you're on this side.
Mhm.
Well, what's going on over here? You can't have light without the dark.
Mhm.
You can't have good without the bad. And we've gotten so far out of balance that now suddenly all of those things that we've pushed way down instead of dealing with them or talking about them, sometimes all you have to do is talk it through and it miraculously goes away. And you're like, wow, what was I so angry about?
Mhm.
Um, but we aren't doing that. And we need to do that in a safe, constructive way, not screaming and yelling and blaming somebody else. This is between you and yourself. It doesn't really involve anyone else. If you have someone that will talk to you and provide input, that's great. But it really is something that is best done between you and yourself. Um, so many times we think we need help when we really don't need help. I posted something the other day that said, don't give a lecture to a person who just needs a hug. This
Mhm.
is kind of looking at that same thing, only between you and yourself. Give
Mhm.
yourself a hug. Tell yourself it's going to be okay. But first, before it's okay, you have to dig into your shadow self and address anything you find there. Sometimes when you go very, very deep, it's funny. It's like, that's why I was upset. When you finally realize what pushed you over the edge, it's like, are you kidding me? But that's what the energies are all about right now. It's
Mhm.
about being truthful and honest to yourself first.
Yeah.
And recognize that while you're out there creating and working and building a life, you're also looking at this stuff that you have to address. And what we do is we focus so much on what feels good
Mm-hmm.
that we don't do the inner work. And that's what this really is. It's inner work. If you're creating outer work, you need to also be looking at your inner self so you can do that inner work. The most positive people I've ever known have set aside a day or some time every day or something on a regular basis where they will sit down and say, what's really bugging me right now? Now, I know everything looks great and everything is going well, and I'm really happy and I'm really grateful, but what is bothering me right now? And if you ask yourself that periodically,
Mm-hmm.
you won't have to dig through so many layers the next time. And there will be a next time. That's all about being human. So that's what I think is going on. Take it or leave
I'm not even sure what to add to that.
it.
So, I just sometimes I forget how much of an empath I really am. And I forget how much I internalize, even though I have all kinds of boundaries and protection around me. And I've been on a lot of Zoom meetings this week for work, and I didn't realize how much all that energy was really affecting me.
It builds up. One of the things that I heard someone that I know locally here
Hmm.
say is, she was going about her day and feeding animals. And these are the discussions I have at the feed store.
Hmm.
Uh, and all of a sudden, she sat down and she said, those poor kids, those poor parents. And she was just bawling her eyes out. And that lasted for about a half hour. And then she was okay and she went on about her business. But it shocked her that even though she had purposely avoided the news, she purposely avoided anything on social media about what happened, all of a sudden she's having to deal with it because it came up when she was least expecting it. And, that was a horrific thing. So I think probably all of us are carrying a little bit of that around.
We've talked about that because I've called you and I'm like, oh my God, I can't stop crying today. What is going on? And because also I try and stay away from the news and things like that. But, we've just had such a rash of violence in our country, in the United States, in case you're watching this outside of the United States, that, if you're an empath, you can't help but be affected by it. And
Yeah,
then the trick becomes, well, then what do you do with it? Because technically it's not really yours to carry, but you feel everything.
you do feel everything. And what I started doing actually about a month ago, every night at the end of the day, when I'm ready to wrap up my whole day, I sit down and I download it and I, just let it out. And sometimes I just send it straight down to Mother Earth to be transmuted. Other times I make a giant energy ball out of it and I just shove it out there into the universe. Um, but it's a simple ritual like that that
Mhm.
really can help a lot of people. We don't talk enough about doing those simple things for yourself as a whole, not just on the show, as a whole. We just don't talk about that kind of stuff. And it's so important, even if it's just 30 seconds of, I'm not sure what's going on with that. Even if it's just 30 seconds of, this is what I need to deal with today.
Mhm.
Even on those days that I feel like really nothing happened, was it just like a perfect, pristine day? I still go through that
Mhm.
because what I learned the hard way, of course, it's how I learn everything, um, is if I don't deal with it as it comes up, because I feel everything so deeply,
Mhm.
I get bogged down and I find where I'm just not able to have a good day. I get in such a headspace that everything is gloom and doom. And I learned I can't allow that to happen to me. It makes me physically sick. And I have enough issues with autoimmune diseases without making myself sick on top of it.
I hear you. It's an interesting dilemma,
Yeah.
you know. It's just there's just so much going on. It's like, what do you pick and choose to focus on? Because it's like every you just get inundated every day with something.
I had a mentor
I
who
just heard
would,
assault to your senses.
yes,
Basically, where our senses are being assaulted every day.
exactly. That's exactly what it is. Now, I had a mentor who would compartmentalize everything.
Mhm.
As she would, to be in her class was amazing because she would be in the middle of something and she'd say, "Okay, bad thought. We're going to take that out. We're going to put that right there." And she would go on with whatever she was doing, and I would see her on breaks taking them down, dealing with it, and throwing it away. She would literally throw it in the trash can. And I laughed. I thought it was the most hilarious thing I'd ever seen in any class, anytime. But having progressed, 10 years later,
Mhm.
now I look at that and I go, huh, maybe she was on to something. I don't know that I would do that while I was teaching a class, but I think it worked
What
for
kind of
her.
class was it? I mean,
When I was going through intense Reiki and
okay.
all of the chakras, and she was absolutely amazing.
Mhm.
And I went through classes for 2 years with her, and then she became my mentor for another two.
Mhm.
So I got to know her really well. But it just, I remember how hard I laughed at the time. And I didn't even hide it. I was like in class cracking up. And she looked at me and she goes, "One day you'll understand." Yep, she was right. I do now.
So yeah, it's just such interesting things. I know so many people who are going through so many different things right now, and it's just like, again, you still need to help yourself first, because if you don't help yourself first, then you can't help others. You know, the famous thing, put your own oxygen mask on first before assisting others. Because if you pass out, you're not going to be able to help anyone else. So
No.
it really is important to do that.
Yeah, there seemed to have been, maybe it's because I'm so entrenched in the Animal Rescue Society, but there seems to have been an enormous amount of animals exiting stage left lately too. I've seen it on Facebook. Everybody I know locally has lost, an animal.
Mm.
Fortunately, I have not, but I'm sure it's coming. Um, and I think that kind of, we form very close. If you are of the persuasion where you love animals,
Hmm.
we form very, very, very intensely close relationships with them.
Yeah.
And I think just like people come into our lives to either teach us or help us or show us something about ourselves, animals do the same thing. And when they are finished, when they feel like they've done what they came to do, they leave
Mhm.
and they don't feel bad about it. And that's one of the things that a friend of mine is having. Her husband is actually dying, and they know it's terminal. He's lived 1 month longer than the 3 months they gave him to this point.
Mhm.
And she just, I'm on the phone with her for hours, just what do I do? What am I going to do? All this stuff. And she called and she was laughing. And I'm like, whoa, that's a change. What happened? And she said, I told him some of the things I always tell you.
Mhm.
And he looked at me and said, I don't know why you're so upset about me leaving. It's not like I'll always be gone, I'll always be with you. But please, for the love of God, let me get rid of this pain. And she said, all of a sudden it dawned on her. He doesn't feel bad about leaving. He's like, I can't wait to go. Show me the door. Why am I still here? And she called and she says, for some for some reason, that was comforting to
Mhm.
her. And I don't know why it was comforting to her, maybe because she's one of my friends and we're all a little strange. But it became something that she was no longer afraid of.
Mhm.
It's not like she was looking forward to it necessarily, but it was comforting to her to think about him not being in pain anymore.
Mhm.
And I think we do that with our animals as well. I know I've got one old guy that he is, my vet asked me when I was going to tell him he was dead, because for 3 years, it's been any day now, any day. And he gets so close. And I'm like, oh, I don't want him to suffer. I'll call the vet. And I call the vet and I make an appointment and he rebounds, and he was really, really, really bad yesterday. This morning, he brought me a tennis ball. So, he's still deciding, I think. And I think he knows I still need him.
Mhm.
He is teaching my puppies. They're almost not puppies anymore, but he's teaching them. And I kind of need him to do that. And I think he knows that, and that's why he's still here.
Not only with animals, but I had that same experience when my mother was, becoming
Mhm.
more terminal and dying. Like, I'd have to call an ambulance, and I'm like, "This is it." She's ready to go. She doesn't want to be in pain anymore. And then we get to the hospital, and then a couple days later, she'd be doing much better. And I'm like, you know,
Yep.
Mom, whenever you need to go, you need to go. And I had the rest of my family, I'll say goodbye. My family thinks I'm kind of nutty anyway.
Mine
So,
does too. That's okay.
you know, so it's always just interesting, right? We have all these experiences, and what do we want to do with them? Because as part of our humanness, we need to make sense out of them, and they don't always make sense.
Yeah. Some things happen that will never make complete sense, no matter how many perspectives you look at it from. It just won't.
Mhm.
But I think that's part of it too. Sometimes we need to just go along with it and accept, okay, doesn't make sense to me, but it must make sense somewhere. So
Mhm.
we're just going to let that go and move on. And I know for me, that's been one of the hardest things to do. I
Mhm.
think a lot of people have a lot of trouble with that. It's like, but I can see how it will all work out, and it just ultimately it's not our decision,
Mhm.
you know. It's just try to push through it and not get caught up in it and try to remember that balance because there always has to be a balance. And I know I'm a Libra. In fact, I'm a double Libra.
Mhm.
So believe me when I say I've had trouble with that balance thing in my life throughout my life.
Mhm.
But sometimes you just need to move through it. And I was on the phone last night with someone having the worst panic attack I have heard this person have probably in a decade. And it was just, as a therapist, they get on this merry-go-round and they go around and around and around and around, and it's like you get them in different talking about different subjects, and then all of a sudden they're back to where they began, and I did that for a long time last night, and finally I said, just stop. Where are you right now? And she said, whoa, I'm not even in my body. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Because this is someone that I have taught, and this is someone who I know well enough to say, okay, you're not listening to me. You're not hearing what I'm saying, or we're going to do something different. Where are you?
Mhm.
And sometimes, if you can just stop yourself
Mhm.
and say, where am I? Usually, when I've done that, I'm not here. I'm like over there somewhere. And that's what we do, whether we realize it or not. When you get stuck in your head,
Mhm.
you're not in your body. And you cannot manifest anything positive if you are not in your body. So, the big key that I had to learn for myself
Mhm.
is to stop and say, where am I? And I don't know why I went off on that tangent, but somebody told me to. So,
Well, from the therapy standpoint, what you do with people who are having panic attacks or in a dissociated state, you work on just grounding them,
mhm.
bringing them back to the present moment. And then there's the trick of the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What do you see? What do you hear? What can you taste? What can you smell? What can you touch?
Yep.
Forget which order they go in, but and once you get out of your head and you come back to the present moment, everything is always okay in the present moment.
Right.
The past or the future that well, the past causes depression and the future causes anxiety.
And all we ever really have
Is right
is
now.
right now.
Mm,
And, early on when I first started going down this path, as far as finding teachers and mentors and, attending classes and things, the hardest thing for me was to realize that this is all we ever have.
mhm,
And I was a single mom for a bazillion years. Um, and I would get in a state of absolute panic myself.
mhm,
How am I going to feed this kid? How am I going to pay the bills? How am I going to keep the lights on? And I would talk myself into absolute paranoia. Oh my God, the sky is falling. And it wasn't until somebody said, not happening today. You ate today? Yeah. Kid ate today? Yeah. Animals ate today? Yeah. Okay, you're fine. You have electricity today? Yeah. And that I didn't understand it at first.
mhm.
And I know someone's going to watch the show at a later date and they're going to go, that doesn't make any sense at all. And you need to hear it because really, this is all we have.
Mhm.
So make the best of it. And if you've gotten yourself worked up into such an unbalanced state that all you're feeling is rage or anger or depression or whatever you're feeling, then there's your sign. You need to stop and take it one moment at a time.
Yeah, I think that when difficult things happen in our lives, that's when we learn to be grounded and to be present because everything else either hurts too much or it's too difficult. So you either go away or you learn to just stay in the present moment.
Or you do both. I've scoped out a really nice cave up in the mountains.
One of my favorite analogies that I used to use all the time when I was counseling a lot of people with eating disorders, and it's true for what we're talking about right now. One of my favorite movies when I was little was Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the original one, because I'm old. And at the end of the movie, sorry if you haven't seen it, I'm going to give it away. They get in the glass Wonkavator and they've pressed every button but one. And he's like, we have to get enough speed. We have to get enough speed, or we're going to get ripped to shreds as we crash through the glass ceiling. And as you crash through the glass ceiling, you then get a whole new view of your life. And I feel like that's where a lot of us are right now. We're just trying to get enough speed to crash through it so that we can shift the things that we want to shift.
Yeah. I have a friend who is a minister,
Mm-hmm.
and he has this theory that we're wrong about the teenage years.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the most difficult time in your life. It's middle age because that's when people start having regrets or guilt or
Mm-hmm.
shoulda, woulda, couldas is what I call them. And that's when people do really crazy things. We talk all the time about men who are married forever and they leave their spouse of however many years for someone literally half their age. And women who the eat pray love book. I'm going to throw everything away and I'm just going to go to another country. But middle age is really when we start looking back
Mm-hmm.
more than we look forward. And I've been really fortunate, and I'm very grateful for that. I had a grandmother who didn't age. She just went out drinking, drank Jack Daniels, played Blackjack 21, pretty much till the day she died. So, I mean, she was just the antithesis of what an old person was supposed to be, when I was growing up. My mother was older than my grandmother, I swear. And because I watched her do that, when she had a huge disagreement with my mother when I was a teenager, that she didn't think it was right that I saw my grandmother dressing up to go out dancing and drinking with her friends. And I always wanted to be my grandmother. I was like, that is the coolest thing. It just, she was so awesome to me. And I am very much like her in a lot of ways. I don't go out dancing, mostly because there's nowhere to go out dancing to where I live, which is probably a good thing when you think about it. But most people I know, and I have a sister who's younger than I am, and she acts like she's ancient, and I do think it's a state of mind
Mm-hmm.
that I was fortunate enough to achieve. But my minister friend was talking about some people in his congregation that they look like, they're about to drop dead any moment, and they're in their 40s. And I'm like, huh? You know, but that's what we do to ourselves
Mm-hmm.
in middle age. We're like, oh, I always thought I'd be rich by now. Oh, I always thought I'd have everything I ever wanted by now. Oh, I always thought I'd have this car or that house or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And we lose that focus on the present moment. Because if you're killing yourself working, and then you're killing yourself for berating yourself for not having gone farther in life than you are,
Mm-hmm.
you're really doing it to yourself, and you're depriving yourself of that beautiful present moment that you've already created. I thought he's writing a book, so we talk a lot about different viewpoints,
Mm-hmm.
and he always comes to me because I always throw something in right out of left field. But
Imagine that.
I know, right? Yeah. I don't know why so many of the people I talk to in depth
Mm-hmm.
about spiritual things or different types of religions, and I've studied most of them. Um, I don't know why so many of them are people of the clergy, but they really are. I am almost surrounded by Methodist, Baptist, Catholics. I have a couple of rabbis that I talk to on a regular basis. I mean, they're everywhere, and it's like and a Buddhist monk. So I don't know why. I don't know how that happened, but for whatever reason, it has. And some of the most enlightening conversations that we've had. But that one really hit home, because how many people do you know that were perfectly content with the way their lives were going until they hit 45 or 50 or 55 or whatever it is? And now all of a sudden, well, I should have been this, or I should have done that. And that's because they're not worthy questions.
There's also kind of the opposite end that sometimes people who grew up with trauma and stuff never saw themselves getting to the age that they're at, and they don't know what they're supposed to do now because they never envisioned that they would actually be this age.
Oh,
What do
I
you?
was quite certain I wouldn't live to be this age. I was positive, but in every past life, I've died young.
Mhm.
So,
So it's a really interesting dynamic. Both are true. Some people look back with regret, and some people go, "How did I get here? I don't remember anything about my life. What am I supposed to do now?" So it's just a very interesting dichotomy.
that you hit on something there. There are large swaths of my childhood that I do not remember. And I've talked about it with a couple of my siblings, and they don't remember it either. So either we were temporarily residing in a different realm, or we went through something absolutely horrific to the point where none of us remember it. And there's really no comparison between me and anyone else in my family. I've just always been the weirdo. Um, and my daughter is now the weirdo of the cousins. It's like nobody, it's just different. But isn't that interesting how I've undergone hypnosis and I cannot recall what happened in those lost years. And none of else will talk about it.
It's just an interesting dynamic is how powerful our brains are to protect us from things that are going to be too traumatic for us to remember.
Yep. So,
Sorry, the therapist part of me, every now and then it pops out.
well, it's just fascinating to me because I didn't realize that I didn't remember until my brother that passed away, he and I were talking, and he was saying, hey, you know what's really weird? I don't remember being my son's age. And his son at the time was 11. And I'm like, huh, that's really interesting. I don't remember that time period either.
Well, it's interesting that none of you remember.
None of us do.
That's the really interesting part because usually there's someone who remembers.
And most of us have tried
Mm-hmm.
to go back and recall that. And it's buried, it's gone. It's like some divine being somewhere said, nope, taking that away. I mean, we all have an idea based on stuff we do remember, but no, none of us do.
So yeah, I mean, that kind of stuff is really interesting.
Yeah. I've always said if anyone wanted to do a movie that was both hilarious and terrifying at the same time, somebody should come in and do a movie on my family. Because there's dysfunctional and then there's whatever that was, And it's interesting what an interesting cast of characters has come from my family. No two of us are exactly alike. I'm the most different of all of them. Very, very interesting.
Well, and the interesting thing, though, too, is that we all choose to come back with the same people in different lifetimes, just in different relationships. So it's just really interesting. It's like, well, what do you guys all need to, still continue to work out that you're in this soul group and still this soul contract that you guys keep coming back together to work things out?
When my brother died, before anyone had called me, he'd already come to see me. And he said, what the hell was that? And, I always, ever since, and I've talked to him since then, but ever since he said that, I've been wondering, what was that? It was something, but it was, yeah, very, very interesting. And I've done enough work in battered women's shelters and in shelters for ex-sex workers or trafficked people to know that what happened with me and my family is not that unique. You can go into any battered women's shelter and you can find half a dozen people who will step up and say, I don't remember between this age and this age. And it's interesting. It's not that rare. It's not that uncommon.
The interesting thing, though, if we continue to move forward with this topic, is that you may not remember, and yet it shaped how you look at the world now. And all the decisions that you make now are based on something that you can't remember in order to protect yourself going forward.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. Yep. But that got me down the psychology rabbit hole. And when I didn't find the answers there, I went straight to spirituality and religion. And I interviewed different religious people until I found bits and pieces. I take that with that one and that from that one and that from that one and combine to create my own religion, as it were. have to
You know,
be.
I remember not necessarily doing that with religions, but I did that when I took a lot of classes. I'm like, well, this fits, this fits, this fits. And, I was given a message at the time that each of the healing modalities that I studied all had a little bit different frequency and a little bit different vibration and
Yep.
all came from a different part of the earth. So, since I was taking so many, it was to make me more whole in how I saw things and then how I practiced it going forward as opposed to just being one type. And it used to really annoy I used to annoy teachers in classes because 10 minutes into the class, I'd be like, oh, well, this is what it does. And it bypasses this, and this is what you're looking for, and this is how it's supposed to work. They're like, we're 10 minutes in. I
Yeah.
haven't even discussed that with you yet.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, here's where we are.
Yep. Well, it's interesting times that we're living in. Some days I wonder what I was thinking agreeing to come back right now. And other days I'm like, oh, this is exactly why I am here right now. Um, but every day, every moment, I am amazed by something. You know, I am everybody's bed and breakfast that wants to come visit this area. And I had somebody here who wanted to go to some of the wineries. There's a very lovely winery not too far from here that is run by some monks. And we walked up and you go through these beautiful
I feel
gates.
like this is a joke. We walked
No,
a couple
it's
of
not. We went through these beautiful gates and we're going to the wine tasting and there are little signs and a path that guides you exactly where you need to be so that you don't bother the monks who are busy doing monk stuff. Um, and someone came running out, called me by a name I do not recall ever hearing before. And I looked and I knew this person. I didn't know how I knew this person, never seen him before, never been there before, but I knew this person. And he fell on his knees and he grabbed my knees and he said, do you know who you are? Please tell me you know who you are. And I went, well, gee, I thought I did a minute ago. Now I'm not so sure. So we got a whole tour of the entire monastery and ended with the wine. And we each brought a bottle of wine back. And it was just such a weird experience. I still don't know who I was or who this person thought I was, but it was certainly interesting. And the longer I live here, the more those things happen to me. And isn't that strange? Interesting.
Anything else that you want to talk about or cover today?
I don't think so. We've been all over the place.
That's a typical show for us. So,
Yep.
all right, everybody, this concludes episode 40. If there's things you want us to talk about, reach out to Kellie or myself, and we will make sure to talk about those in a future podcast. Everybody, have a great evening, and we will see you guys all again next week. Bye for now.
Bye.